Hey, Steph. Yeah, as the calendar noted, we're going to be just talking about general questions and answers in our contract training this month of December.
Morning.
Good morning, afternoon. And we're just going to focus on different topics of what we covered through the year in 2022. So today we're going to generalize on topics under the listing questions, listing presentation, listing service, and also on inspections. I was just reading in the WRA hot tips about as is situations where a listing is stated as is, and what does that mean? So there are a lot of things in inspections and a lot of things under listings that I know still may have questions, whether you are a new licensee or you're an experienced licensee. It's something that we are always learning new avenues and aspects about. So we'll basically be open to your questions. Remember, your questions are important to everybody. So what you may be bringing up would be something maybe somebody else hadn't thought about, but is really thankful that you brought it up. So anything you want to say, Steph?
No, just there are no bad questions. It spurs conversation. So hopefully you guys have some. Kelly, do you have one?
No, I was hoping to get the kind of learn from the group and everyone else's questions for today.
Sure.
Yeah, I think I'm pretty well set right now. But of course, tomorrow I'm sure I'll have or in an hour from now, I'll have a question, but I think I'm pretty good in terms of the contracts.
I'll ask a question to the group. What do you think an as-is listing means? So if a seller, whether it's an estate or a trust, or it's an actual live seller, they say, I want to sell this as is. What do you think that means? Anybody can pop up.
They don't want to do any work. They don't want to make any repairs or improvements, whether they've lived there or not. They're basically declaring that. But I think from past meetings with you that doesn't necessarily mean as is. I think the intent is that they don't want to do anything in terms of repair or make any changes to the property.
Right. I mean, if it's an actual living seller that's still in the house, they can still make that statement. I think there's a lot of grayness about what as is means. And I think you're right, Sarah, when it just talks about, I don't want to do anything. If it's in an estate or a trust, there's no seller there. Actually, they're just representatives of the property. And they necessarily might not want to do anything either. So there are two different scenarios. But if you are a buyer's agent, what do you tell your buyer at this point?
I think, well, so my kind of thinking would be that like it just gives us some like information about what the seller or their trust or whatever kind of might like, it kind of just like previews what their stance is going to be. Like if you ask them for a repair, they probably won't do it. We might ask for a credit instead or something like that. Which is kind of like how I think about it. Just as like a clue on how they're going to react in any sort of negotiating position.
Yep. I always tell buyers that doesn't preclude you from attempting to negotiate. We can ask sun, moon, and stars, it's just going to be exactly what you said, Kelly, just setting them up for how they will respond. So Yeah, I think it's just giving them the understanding that it doesn't mean that they can't try and get a price reduction based off of a, $10,000 foundation repair. I mean, because a lot of these things are undiscoverable at the time that they're listed, right? Too, and a seller's not going to know what's going to come up on an inspection. So they might still have to, make concessions on these things. But the likelihood of them making the repair prior to closing is probably lower. So, and I also want to tack on to this that bank-owned properties, don't communicate with buyers that you can't try and ask a bank to make concessions on repair items either. So I think there's a misunderstanding
As
with
a
that.
buyer's agent too, if they're stating that it's as is, which like Sarah was saying, it means I'm not going to fix anything. Would you most generally then not give the seller right to cure in the inspection contingency, or would you still give them right to cure?
I'll
What do you
jump in. I would not give right to cure. Yeah.
And there's a lot of rights that a buyer has in an as-is condition. If it's stated that it's as is, most likely you wouldn't give them right to cure. You could try, and as Steph was saying, you could always continue to negotiate. But most likely you're not going to give them right to cure, which actually gives your buyer a lot more control.
Mm-hmm.
If any defects are found in these inspections in an as-is property, just by filing a notice of defect, the offer is null and void and the earnest money goes back to the buyer. I had a call last week or a couple weeks where the broker was, or the agent was asking, does that mean that they can't have an inspection when it's as is? And I said, it's quite the opposite. In an as-is property, you want to have the most thorough inspections, and I would say inspections, that you can list in the offer, because since they're not representing anything and they're not going to fix anything, the buyer really has to know what they're getting into and what the cost would be, and if things can be fixed, and or were they just going to cost a lot of money. So the opposite is, yes, the seller should have thorough inspections on as is, because they are not giving up their right to file a notice of defect with as is condition.
Mm-hmm.
Just the opposite. Any other questions about under inspections on what happens? What if there's an argument about what a defect is? Say the buyer lists notice of defects to which the buyer objects, and the seller goes, what are they saying? That's not a defect. That's just maintenance, or that's just cosmetic or something. What do you do in that situation? Say if the seller and the listing agent argue with the defect that you've listed, what do you do?
Negotiate.
Well, it actually does kick up a question now that you mention it. So my initial thought would be to just refer to the inspection report and like kind of let the inspector be the tiebreaker, like if they note that something is like a defect or if they note that it's maintenance or whatever. But I guess, so then that's what I, in theory think is the correct thing to do. But I've also had there was one time a buyer picked an inspector where the inspection report was a little bit more informal than like some other ones I'd seen. So I was just like, it was kind of hard to like suss out what was a defect or not. So I guess I'm not sure if that's always the correct way to go about things.
Yeah, the recent law made it a lot easier on inspectors, that they have to actually list what they consider a defect. It's similar to the contract's definition of defect. It's not exactly the same, but now it's easier for the agent to serve a notice of defect by using defects that are actually listed on the inspector's report, rather than concluding from what the inspector says, whether they call it a defect or not, which is the way it always used to be. And there were more arguments about what is a defect. I had a situation one time where an agent in my office, I got a notice of defect, and the notice being one of the defects was crabgrass in the backyard. I mean, it was wide open back then, basically what you could call a defect. And that actually went to a court, and the court decided for the buyer, saying that if a buyer considered it a defect, it was a defect, which was didn't make sense, but you never can tell what the court's going to decide sometimes. But now that inspectors are supposed to actually list what they consider defects in their inspection, it narrows it down and makes it a much easier to talk about what really are defects. But if there are disputes over what's a defect or how a notice of defect is written, and we've seen a lot of incorrectly written notices of defect, that's up. Then that goes to pick your attorney, what corner of the ring are you going to sit in? And if the attorneys can't even come to a conclusion, then it does go to the court to decide. So we can't decide if we're representing the seller or representing the buyer. We can't definitively say, oh, that's a defect, or no, that's not a defect. The definitions in the offer and in the statements, it's still pretty gray. The three aspects of what is considered a defect is pretty gray, mainly because they do want it to be finally established by the court if there's an argument. A lot of things in our contract are gray for that reason. Any other situations you've been in or worries you have about a notice of defect? Filing a notice of defect? You know how you write a proper notice of defect? Anybody want to jump in?
For my understanding, to fill out the notice would be like going through the inspection report and like pointing out like majority of the defects, or I guess maybe the most expensive to get out of the offer, maybe, or that's what my understanding is.
What you decide goes on a notice of defects can be, discussed with the buyer.
Right, I mean, with the buyer, yeah.
Right. But yeah, so I think what we want to make clear is when it comes down to the notice of defects, at this point, we're going to be, we've gotten past negotiating, whether or not you've attempted to negotiate or negotiations broke down, but now we've gotten to this point that, it's no longer making requests of the seller. It's, putting these repairs on a notice itself. So the point here is that we would just be listing defects versus trying to decide how the defects would be remedied. So it would just be a simple, this is a notice of defects, buyer objects to the following conditions, and then you would just lifted from the inspection report what defects have been identified, and then you would just leave it at that. And then whether or not you have given the seller the right to cure or not, once you've delivered this, if the seller does not have the right to cure, then you've killed the deal, or they've declared the offer null and void, because the seller did not have the right to cure. If they do have the right to cure, now it's in seller's court. They've received this notice of defects, and now they can determine whether or not they want to cure the defects listed, or at that point, let the buyer out of the deal. But back to your point, regarding, picking, or determining, you know, if your buyer's objection or buyer's goal is to get out of the deal and the seller has given right to cure, then yes, you would want to make sure that that notice of defects is very robust and listing everything that you possibly could. Because that would, like, you know, that would prevent the seller from wanting to take action if they've got a big laundry list of things that they need to cure. So thank you for bringing that up, Rona. So that is definitely a strategy that agents will use to make sure that the seller does not want to elect to cure.
You know, and the notice of defects is saying to the seller, when you agree to cure, that means you are agreeing to cure everything on the list. The seller just can't pick and choose which defects he wants to cure. He has to cure all that are stated on the notice. There can be ongoing negotiations from a notice of defect. It doesn't have to be the total end all of a contract. Either party can come back with an amendment saying they're withdrawing. Buyer can say they're withdrawing the notice of defect and offer another maybe better conciliation or some kind of a agreement that hopefully the seller agrees to, and they can put the contract back on the rails and go to closing. But in that amendment, it has to say we are withdrawing this notice of defect and seller to do blah, 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 stuff like that, or credit or whatever. So basically the notice of defect is the final stage in the inspection contingency, but it can be re-enlivened if both parties are agreed to. Let's keep talking. So I've said it so many times in my career to agents, but I believe your highest value as a real estate agent is your skills in negotiating. And the more you learn how, and it is a skill that you can learn and practice and hone and get better at it, but the better your skills are in negotiating, I think the higher your value is to a client. So always consider that, always keep looking for options. Don't take the easy way out because you may be leaving money on the table or a property on the table that maybe your buyer really did want. So continue to negotiate, think of creative, good ideas to negotiate, read anything you can find in talking about the art of negotiating. Look at the YouTube videos under negotiating, see what you can find in there, but always keep improving how you negotiate. I always say you have a leg up on your negotiating skills if you have children, because they're probably the best negotiators ever. A 3-year-old can really work his way into anything he wants. But that's what you've got to keep doing. That's what you have to keep learning.
And to tack on to that, I had a buyer consultation recently, and the buyers asked me, you know, why wouldn't we use an attorney to draft paperwork? Like, what's the benefit of using an agent? And I said exactly that. Just, you know, an attorney is going to draft paperwork per your direction, but they're not going to be able to negotiate, and they don't have market understanding. You know, they're not out in the field every day seeing how offers are being written in order to, for example, win out in a competitive situation, you know. So just make sure that you're highlighting that as part of your, you know, just in reaction to asking or answering those kind of questions, like, why wouldn't we just hire an attorney to do this? So that's where our, as Joni said, like, that's our real value as agents, is just being out in the field and understanding what's going on in the marketplace. So
yeah, and an attorney his goal is win for his client and lose for the other side. So it's a win-lose situation. A real estate agent's goal is a win-win, that both parties win in some way, and that is come about by negotiating. Any other situations that you can think of with inspections?
Yeah, so it might be ultimately the same answer as what to do if a buyer and seller disagree on what a defect is. But let's say you agree on things, the seller agrees to repair whatever items, but the sellers do like a substandard like repair on whatever like the item is. Like what kind of options does a buyer have? Like if they do just like like technically, yes, it's fixed, but not, it's still like not in a good state.
Well, unless the buyer has modified the offer to go beyond what's broom clean condition or in a good and workmanlike manner, which is the way the contract says that the property should be left and how the seller should fix anything that would be considered a defect. In a good and workmanlike manner is really gray and wide open. And so, but you have to ask for something a little more particular when you're writing the offer. You can't really, in an amendment after the inspection, start throwing in that you want a licensed contractor. Now, you can do it in an amendment if you're negotiating. If you're getting to the notice of defect stage, then you can't start dictating who's going to fix it and who's going to. So in the amendment part, you can ask that lien waivers and invoices be provided, that it be done by a licensed contractor in the state of Wisconsin. You can do all that. But if the seller doesn't sign that, it doesn't necessarily mean that's how you're going to get those corrections made. If you get to the notice of defect stage, you certainly can't ask for any conditions. As Steph said, all you're doing is listing the defects. You can't say why and how and what happens when this defect isn't cured and blah, blah, blah. It's just a simple list of the defects. So constructing in your offer to purchase, starting way out, saying if notice of defect is served, all work to be done in a good and workmanlike manner and with a licensed contractor in the state of Wisconsin, and all lien waivers and invoices provided. So you put that in up front so that if you do get to the stage of a notice of defect, the seller's already agreed to do it that way. If not, as I said, it's ruled by the very great phrase of in a good and workmanlike manner. And those are situations I know where Steph and I get a lot of questions because the problems arise at that point. They didn't fix it, or they didn't fix it the way I wanted to fix it, or they just put a cheap, filter on or whatever. That's what you agreed to.
Excuse me, Joan, in the drop down, is the language you just described about the lien waivers, and is that an option as verbiage that we can just insert and is available to us, or is that something that we should have written down very carefully to insert ourselves?
It's in the clause library. So under the category of offer to purchase, it is, I think the clause title is right to cure. So then you'll pick that and then just pop it in. So.
Yeah, but again, you have to pop it in the offer up front.
Right, at the time of writing the offer, yep. So yeah, Kelly, I was gonna respond to, or make sure that that was highlighted for you. So do you guys know where that is in the clause library? Okay, cool. Cool.
Yeah, Steph's recent contract training on using our services that we have made available to us and get to know the clause library and all what's in it. It not only saves typing, but it saves a lot of contracts. And if you just go to the blank lines in your contract, there's a little open scroll book, and that will take you to the global library, excuse me, to the clause library. And all you do is click on the one you want and it pops right into your offer. Very, very helpful.
I have a question.
Go ahead, sure.
Has anyone worked with home that is occupied with the tenant that will be after closing, and as far as the cleaning and things like that? I think I'm gonna be going through that after my closing this Friday, but the tenant does not have to be out until the couple days after Christmas. How does that work as far as it being clean, and broom swept?
Well, you have in your offer that if the tenant or the seller has the right to stay in the property post-closing, in addendum O, and also I think in addendum R under rentals, if they are allowed to stay beyond closing, the buyer has a right to a walkthrough before the person leaves, just to make sure that the property looks good. But you as a real estate agent really don't have a role in that. I mean, the buyer really has to work with the tenant or the seller who's still living there and come up with a time that's convenient for both parties and they can go over. They are now in control. The buyer now owns that property. The tenant or the seller staying there post-closing has been given permission by that buyer to do it, but they aren't to negotiate together when they can go through what they're going to look for and things like that. Your role is over.
Okay, because I did the walkthrough already, even with the tenants, and it looks like they're packing up. But like I said, if they're closing, I'm done with everything, right? My role. Okay,
Right.
So I'll mention that to my buyers. Thank you.
Right. Just make sure that they, exchange contact information, how to message them, how to call them, how to whatever, so that they can continue to finish this between the two of them after closing.
Okay, that sounds good. My other question, does the co-broke, do they have to respond to my last amendment? I needed to change the closing date from last Friday to this Friday. And he's being very, very arrogant. He doesn't even respond to anything at this point. Does he have to respond even though I put in the date to respond?
Well, hopefully he's not responding due to instructions by the seller and not on his own not response.
Right, because obviously he knows that we weren't, everything didn't pan out with my buyer's grant, but the grant is good now, but yeah.
Yeah.
He is not a good co-broke to work with. So now that I'm
it's
finding this out.
unfortunate. And I have forgotten, because we've talked about this situation. Does he work? Does he have his own company, or does he work in a company where he has a broker?
He has a broker.
Okay. And that may be something that in that situation, because it's pretty urgent, maybe I can call the broker and, see if we can get at least some kind of a response from the seller. And that's what you want, is a response from the seller,
not him. Right. Because I sent it to him on Thursday the 8th, because I knew, in the prior amendment I asked for, an extension, and the seller rejected both dates for the financing contingency and the closing date that I recommended, which is the same date that I asked for again now. It's like I knew this was going to happen, but he just didn't respond to it on Thursday, which I gave him until Friday, to even respond.
And Friday was the offered closing date, right?
Yes. So it's like I asked for the 16th twice.
Right.
So
Well, because you're past the closing date, you know, you may not have a situation. The seller may be saying that they don't want to sell.
okay.
But this is something, if your buyer wants to continue to sort of try to get this to work, you and I really can't advise what I said to you earlier. You know, we
Okay.
really can't give them advice on this. It's something
Okay.
they need to just call an attorney or meet with an attorney for some advice on what they're doing. But at this point, they're past the contract.
Yeah.
So if they're not responding, if it's really the seller and not just the listing agent not responding, he literally still has an obligation to call you and let you know what's happening.
Right, exactly. And I've been waiting. I'm trying not to be pushy, but he knows how to get in contact with me. So
Right. And he could be working at the instruction of the seller. So,
okay. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you, Joan.
I have a
Yeah,
question,
we'll
Joan.
talk later more about this.
Okay.
Okay.
Joan, I have a question. So, I have a deal that is scheduled to close on the 20th. Everything is, squared away. The, buyer agent has confirmed that the financing contingency has been met. Appraisal contingency has been met. However, he is holding back on giving me, evidence of the financing. So I can't clear that, that contingency can't be cleared. And so, and I'm not sure why he's doing that, but should I just be tenacious and asking him for it?
Can you call his lender?
I haven't called his lender directly, but can I do that? Can I ask his lender? Okay.
Sure.
Okay, so I thought there was a situation where the buyer had to sign off on the,
You do,
The-
but at least if you call the lender, you can find out what's going on.
okay,
So if he has the loan commitment, but is not signing off on it, or giving it to you to pass along to deliver it, he has to give permission to have it delivered. But you might get some information under what's going on if you talk to the lender.
well, I do think he did share with me that he's gun shy. He was gonna hold it back because one time something happened where the buyer slash borrower went out and I'm making an exaggeration, but bought a Mercedes. And so when they reran credit shortly before closing, the buyer's no longer qualified for the mortgage. And it, so he said that once burned him. And so he's holding it back, but I'm thinking, come on, we're closing on the 20th. It's like, I don't know.
And
I
he
mean,
knows what his risk is by holding it back. That the seller at
because,
any point in time can null and void that contract in a minute.
oh, that's a really good point. I had failed to remember that. So because he's not giving it. Okay.
Right. I mean, the seller has a unilateral right. The minute that loan commitment is past its due date, he can
Yeah.
at any point null and void the contract.
Yeah, well, interestingly enough, the date for that is the 19th. So it
Yeah.
hasn't passed yet, but
Okay.
Yeah.
it's just a kind of an oddball situation. I think he's just gun shy to give it to me based on what I just shared with you. So I don't know.
That
I
does
think
happen. We've seen it happen where they go out and buy a car and quit their job.
Yeah, I know. Okay, thank you. I'll ask him again and we'll see what he says.
These are good situations. Again, the topic is listings and inspections. Listings are hard to get, as we know, and have been for the several years on our low inventory. So sellers are not that willing to get their house on the market at this point. And seasonally, this is probably the lowest time you can get new listings because the holidays are here and everybody's distracted and nobody wants to go look for or buy a house. And so just every year that I've been in real estate around this time of the year, not much is going on. But what you can be doing is giving yourself that preparation time, honing your listing presentation. It's very important that you have a very well thought out, very good listing presentation that shows what your value is to a seller. And that it's simple and direct. And the ones that we have packaged, talk to Lindsay about it, and have it sort of customized for you and your services that you can offer. But this is the time to prepare. This is the time to get your ducks in a row and make sure that when the listings season starts again, which generally be the start of the year, that you're prepared and ready to talk to a seller and show them what you can do to sell their house in a good time, highest equity, and least amount of inconvenience for the seller.
I have a question. I'm getting ready to list my own investment property,
Okay.
and they both have tenants up and down. How do I go about showings? Since they're occupied, do I need to go through Central Lock, or should I just go along with whatever is available and I'll go, and speak to my tenants like, hey, I have a showing at this time. Are you available? If not, then I'll just go over and show the property. How does that work with occupancy?
You
Or
can,
occupancy?
I would have it set up through showing time. So
Okay,
that you can keep an accurate log of who is making requests.
okay,
But then I would have showings just go through you.
okay,
I mean, you're the owner, so I mean, you'll kind of receive I mean, you could just have it be coming through you as the listing agent, and then you'll just confirm with your tenants, and then you can confirm with the agent requesting after that.
okay. So let's say downstairs is available and upstairs they're not gonna be there. Or upstairs isn't ready. Do I just put in there just for downstairs showings or lower unit showings
You
or?
can, what I often see is sellers of duplexes will pick the tenant that is most agreeable to work with. And do like first showings for one unit, and then if a second showing happens, like that the buyer is serious, then they'll open it up for both.
Okay.
But you're the owner, so if I don't know how you want to navigate this, but some people will just tell their tenants, I mean, I don't know what you have built into your lease, but if you give a 12-hour notice or 24-hour notice, it might just be that the tenants have to oblige if you give 24-hour notice,
Right,
so
okay.
you might just want to set it up that way that we're going to give you 24-hour notice no matter what is happening with the unit, whether you're going to be home or not, it's going to be shown. So that's being a little bit hard with it, but I think if you're giving proper notice, then it's not like you're saying the showing is happening in 2 hours. You could, if you just say 24-hour notice, put a lockbox on and put the keys in the lockbox and have the agents just show it.
Okay,
Yeah. So, but your tenants best. So if, at the very minimum, I would have showings being set up through you, but in the way that I just described, you could also put your tenant's information into showing time, and then they would just be notified of when the showing is happening. And then,
So put their information as far as like their phone numbers?
yep,
Gotcha. Okay.
yeah, so
Okay.
you could, you know, and just to make sure that all bases are covered, you could put their email addresses and their phone numbers in so that, and set it up so that they're texted and emailed when a showing is happening.
Okay.
So that, you know, kind of like no excuses, we, you know, don't, you know, I notified you, so.
Okay.
I can show,
sounds
when you're
good.
ready to, when you have it inputted into MLS, I can show you how that works, but.
Okay. Yeah, I have Leah putting it in for me. So,
Okay.
okay.
So you'll just need to navigate that with your tenants and you decide what you think is best. If you want to get a confirmation and a yes, no, or answer from them, or just letting them know, I'm putting the house up for sale.
Mhm.
We're gonna give 24-hour notice. You could also set it up so that it's only happening like during the daytime if you want. And put some restrictions on it that way.
Okay. Okay.
So
That's
that they're not, so at the very least, they're not disrupted at night or something, you know? So,
right. Right. Okay. Thank you so much, Steph.
yeah.
Okay.
I know tenants are, it's tricky because you want to be respectful but you also need to get people in there because sometimes, you know, I've had people complain that it's just like listings are getting held up from selling because of tenants not allowing them into the house.
Right. Yeah. So
And then
true.
then also when you are, you know, talking to your tenants, remind them that their leases survive the closing date. So they won't be like just because you sell it and once it closes, it doesn't mean that your tenants are out. It means that their lease is still going to end, dependent on how you have it set up with their current lease. So like if your current, you know, your lower tenant's lease doesn't end until next June and your closing date is, you know, February of next year, the tenant still has the right to stay in the house until June when their lease is up.
Mhm. Okay.
So just for reassuring them, you know.
Well,
that-
they're, you know what, that's, I'm glad you brought that up because they're actually month to month.
Okay.
So, yeah, so, oh, wow.
Yeah, okay, so then, you know, you're gonna have to explain, I don't know what the new owner is gonna decide to do.
Right.
They, you know, it will be their choice on whether or not they want to renew with you, but they have to follow the lease as it stands, so they'll give you the notice, the proper notice. You know, I don't know what you have written into your lease, whether it's a 30-day notice or a 60-day notice. But I've also had owners get leases in place for their tenants for this exact reason, so that they weren't.
I was gonna ask them too, because they have been with me since I purchased.
Yeah.
So,
If you
and
want to put safeguards around, you know, your tenants, I would get a lease in place so that they can, so that it has to be honored once you sell it.
gotcha. Okay, I'll talk to them. Thank you.
Yeah. No problem. So, that also means, you know, the rental amount per month. That means that the new owner can't come in and raise their rent willy-nilly. Like they have to honor the terms of the lease, of the present lease. So you can lock them in, you know, not, I'm just thinking of possibilities of what a new owner can do, right? So if you want to
Oh,
like,
right. I definitely get it. I get
Yeah.
it. Thank you. Because I was gonna ask you that too, but you got it. Thank you.
yeah. So, good session, guys. Any more questions?
Well, we're available, as you know, just give us a call, let us know, you're in a situation or, you know, some of these things, think ahead. You know, if you're writing an offer, project the dates that you are going to be important in this offer and think ahead what the consequences are for each one of the contingencies or important parts of the offer. You know, don't wait till the stuff is happening and hitting the fan. See if you can project ahead and prepare the process of your offer through to closing. And make sure that everybody's aware of the dates in the offer and the important waivers in the offer, so that you know how to protect. I've said this 100 times, but the secret to being somebody like Steph or me in our positions is all in the contracts. All the answers to everything that we get are right in the contract. And so make sure that you know what the sections in the contract are saying, what the consequences are, what the penalties may be. You know, not to say that we're not going to take your calls, we will, but I want you to also learn how to be prepared when you write an offer with your buyer. So any other questions, or we can terminate today and just give us a call if you have something particular or unique.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Okay,
for coming in.
bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.